Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. Gus Kattengell with you, along with Mr. Jim Eichenhofer from Pelicans.com. Jim, I legitimately, honestly feel now, I tell you this every week, I do see you more than my wife. Saw you Saturday. Saw you Sunday.
Yeah.
And I see you again today.
Yeah, it's a lot of Jim, but you know what? It's not all bad.
It's not all bad.
But it's a lot of exposure to a radioactive substance that might be dangerous for your health. So
you kept me saying yesterday as we were at Manning's for their official watch party, checking out the game. Thank you to all the folks that showed up yesterday and had a good time over there. The next watch party, by the way, no more in December because a lot of home games. So watch party is, us watching a road game. It's going to be on January 10th and 24th of January. So 2 watch parties coming up next month. Please come out and join us. It's a great time. Bree and other members of the Pel squads there, Pierre the Pelicans there, more important, goodies that Jim hasn't already taken. I mean, they bring enough. They bring enough to have some extras. They raffle off jerseys and all kinds of really cool things. It's really fun. So we'll let you know as we get closer to where exactly it is. We've been all over the city already, but January 10th and 24th, we'll have some watch parties. You enjoy the watch parties, aren't you?
I do. It's a nice change of pace. It's nice to get out in the public and instead of either our bunker in the studio of the Smoothie King Center or just at home during the road game. So yeah, I like to mix it up. We've had a lot of fun at some of the watch parties over the last couple of years, especially the wins.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, 2 games over the weekend we need to talk about, Jim. Back on Saturday, the Thunder winning 119-109. In that game, the Pelicans got down by as many as 30 points, so that wasn't fun here as well. And more importantly, something else took place.
His left
He grabbed the
foot.
back of his left foot, which
That
is concerning.
Correct. Now he is in a seated position right now. DeJounte is trying to help him up. Now Ingram on the jump shot. Oh man. Tom Maestad over, and Ingram can't put any weight on his left foot. So just to kind of refresh here, Ingram cannot put any weight on his left foot.
They just sent the 2 biggest players on the team, Trey Jemison and Yves Missi, on the court to carry Brandon Ingram off.
So, Jim, pick a phrase. Insult to injury. When it rains, it pours. I mean, however you want to look at it.
This is torture, maybe.
Okay.
The fact that you bring him back for, there's a ton of excitement Thursday because he and Herb Jones are back and you pull off a great win against Phoenix, and then 17 seconds into the third quarter of Saturday's game, he's already sidelined, and obviously based on the information that the team put out Sunday, he's going to be out indefinitely.
Yeah, we don't like that word, indefinitely.
Yeah,
I'd rather at least hear 6 weeks, 3 months. See you next.
Right.
Indefinitely is, indefinitely.
Yeah, I mean, this is brutal. The fact that this keeps happening, and I know we spent a chunk of probably October and November thinking, okay, so at some point everyone's going to come back.
Yeah.
And then you start to get guys back, and then one of the main guys goes out in the second game after his return from injury. So, I mean, honestly, like at certain points this season, you just have to throw your hands up and just be like, what the heck is going on here?
And you get it, too. I'm sure you do. I'm sure people tweet at you or, when you're grocery line, like, oh, those doctors. It has nothing to do with anything. I mean, it's just, it's luck that I've never seen before. He takes a jump shot. Now, we can talk about what Lou Dort was doing and where he was and not giving him a space to land and things of that nature. But he's jumping up, and it's when the foot comes down. I mean, that has nothing to do with training. That has nothing to do with does a player want to – you know what I'm saying? It's just I've never seen anything like this, Jim.
Yeah, and I mean, you use the phrase insult to injury. I mean, how about the fact that he also got called for offensive foul on that play because of an elbow to Lou Dort? So – but you're right. I mean, it's something that is just really bad luck. I mean, we could sit here and be bitter and say, how is that not a flagrant foul that landing space was taken away too. But I mean, I guess that's an argument for another day. But it is a string of just horrendous luck that has happened to the Pelicans over and over again this season. And we're only 25 games in. It's just staggering to think about what's already happened since training camp.
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, I just don't. There's no other way to look at it. It's just, and it's unfortunate too because Jim, with all those injuries that happened early in the season, Brandon Ingram was having a really good year, and he was the only reason this team actually had chances to fight in some of those games to do that. He had a great attitude. It just stinks to see from that perspective. But as we opened up the show yesterday at Manning's, we said, well, that was yesterday. You have to move on to today. And today being Sunday, taking on a Spurs team that had injuries of their own early on. Victor Wembanyama and Collins, their two big centers, they went out. They came back into the game. Back and forth they went. Pels had it. Did it in the third. They lost the lead, trying to get it back, and then stuff like this happens.
So Paul's got it, front court. You got to get another stop. Paul, hook it up top. Wemby, straightaway three. Killer. Absolute killer. That is their first turn. That's their first field goal since the 5-minute mark. It came at the worst possible time. 1:17, 1:16, 30 seconds to go.
I mean, just hear what Todd just said that. They hadn't made a bucket in 4 minutes.
Right.
And it's to take the lead in. Still.
Kick it to Trey. Fakes the jumper. Back to Murray. Back to Trey. Deep left wing three for the tie. No. Tipped up. Wembanyama's got it. Far corner. Will foul him with 4.5 seconds left. And one free throw will ice this baby. You had arguably your best shooter wide open, taking a left wing three. And he didn't make it. Make or miss league. That's a great extra pass from Murray to get it back to Trey.
Jim, it's just tough to see.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth repeating. We talked about this during the post-game show radio last night, the fact that Pelicans are up by 2 before that Wembanyama 3, and they have a replay challenge where Champagnie for the Spurs is driving to the basket. DeJounte Murray strips him of the ball. They call a foul. It gets overturned to not a foul. Unfortunately, that leads to the Spurs winning a jump ball that Wembanyama makes a 3. So instead of Champagnie just going to the free throw line for 2 free throws, and at best San Antonio can tie the game if he makes both of them, and then you have the ball, and like I said, at worst it's a tie game. You're down by 1 because that possession turned into you giving up 3 points instead of 2. So, I mean, just keeping with the theme of this season so far, where it's like even when something good happens that they review it and it turns out in your favor, you still end up on the wrong side of it because you give up more points than if you would have just said, like, okay, just let him shoot these 2 free throws. I mean, it was a good challenge, but it ended up horribly for the Pelicans.
Head coach Willie Green on the loss.
Really lax start to the game, and it ignited their team.
Wrong one. Head coach Willie Green on the loss.
Yeah, definitely tough. We did a lot. There was a lot of good in this game, and just tough to not be able to finish it out. I know our guys wanted it, but they got nothing to hang their heads about. Definitely you saw the carryover from the last couple quarters of the Oklahoma game into this game, a back-to-back. Big-time contribution from all of our guys that touched the floor tonight. They competed, played hard, played together. It's just tough and sometimes frustrating when we come up short.
Keep an eye on, or remember that word frustrated there, DeJounte Murray.
I mean, it's always good to see fight. Even with losses like that, you take them as a lesson. See where you could be better as an individual, and then obviously most important, bring it together and see what we could do better as a team. But it sucks losing, but when you can compete, and like I said, have a lesson, things you can look back and you have more good things and bad things. I think, it's good moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I think you take moral victories, you can take a little bit more in them if the team was in a situation where they're like just on the fringe of 500 or they're just outside the play-in tournament. You can say, okay, well, this was a good step forward. It's just so costly when you have the record that they have to not be able to just get the victory. So, I mean, they definitely showed good signs. I mean, the game on Saturday, they made a big surge in the fourth quarter, but it was too little too late given the way that they started the game. And then on Sunday, I mean, they're down by 10, I think it was, or no, they go on a 13-0 run, take the lead, and then the unfortunate series of events took place that I detailed as far as what led to Wembanyama's 3-point shot. So it's just it's beyond frustrating to me at this point. Just the fact that you keep seeing them having chances to win games, and to me it hurts even more when you have the record that you have, and you have the games where they've been completely out of it. The game against Dallas recently, Cleveland, where they're down by 30-something points. It's even more frustrating when you have games that are close and you can't get a win at the end of the day of those.
One of the things that we've kind of started talking about here, Jim, is I know we don't want it to be, I think, the case. I know fans don't want it to be the case here as well. But I think it's a very real thing, and I think we're seeing it too. You brought up something when I was frustrated yesterday watching the game, and I'm like, and you're like, the continuity, the confusion, and just you have guys that haven't played basketball together a lot this season.
Right.
While they're veterans, while they're their own rights, while they have contracts. And it's a very real thing, to your point. We're watching a Spurs team that, for the most part, with Wemby, without Wemby, they've played most of the season together. And I think that's something that we alluded to and hinted at last year. But, Jim, I think we're seeing that, right? I mean, we're seeing that. Even though Trey Murphy has played, even though DeJounte Murray's been in the league, even though C.J. McCollum's been in the league, they haven't all played together. And I think you're still seeing them work it out. This is normally what we would see in games 2, 3, 4, 5, isn't it? Even though it's in December. Am I wrong on that?
No, I think you're right. I mean, if you think about it, too, even if we live long enough to see this day where they have a season where they don't have any injuries at all, or they have very few, and they're able to put the exact roster rotation on the court that they wanted to, this margin for error is still small in the Western Conference. So if everything that that's kind of out of your control at least goes in your favor, you still have not that much wiggle room. And so to me, I think the chemistry part of it is definitely important, but it's also easier to sit here and say the chemistry matters in a game that you lose by a possession or two. You can't really blame that when you're down by 30. But in some of these games where, the other part about San Antonio is not only have they been together a lot this season, they've only used 4 different starting lineups. This is something I'm going to get into a little bit later. But, I mean, you compare that to the Pelicans that have used 17.
4
Big
to
difference.
17.
And not only that, but they brought back a lot of guys from last season, so they also have a little bit of that as well. I mean, the Pelicans obviously have a bunch of guys too that have played together for multiple years, but it's just been kind of eroded by the fact that there's been so much in and out and so much changes of roles. Trey Murphy was a starter, then he was coming off the bench for a few games, and now he's back in the starting lineup with Ingram being sidelined. So, I mean, there's just a bunch of different factors. I do think that, when a game comes down to a possession or two, it definitely hurts to be in the position that the Pelicans are right now.
Yeah, and you heard Graf say it there. Your best shooter misses it. The guy still had 25 points, 4 threes in the game, 5 of 5 from the free throw line, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, a block, a steal. That's Trey Murphy. But to your point, he started 38 minutes. Well, then who's providing some points off the bench was Brandon Boston last night. But everybody else, Jeremiah Robinson-Earl had 5, Antonio Reeves, nothing, Jamal Cain, 2. Now, they're not expected, but the point is, Jose, Jordan Hawkins, those are other guys as well that can give you, even if it's 5, 6 points, then you lose by 5. And that's the thing, is that that's what we're trying to kind of explain. It's stressing and it's stretching where the points, where all that comes from when you're missing players.
Another thing, too, I just thought of when you mentioned, the Graf's call of Trey's shot at the end of the game where he has a pretty decent look, doesn't make it. Just talking to people real early this morning, people have talked about how, the Pelicans have been in a position a few times this season to tie a game or win a game with a shot at the buzzer and haven't won it. But the thing is, if you think about it, especially compared to last season, the key last season on the road was you were up by 20-something, 30 points. You don't have to rely on, okay, we need a 3-point shot with 5 seconds left to send the game to overtime, or we're down by 1 and we need somebody to come up with something heroic. I mean, last year they were the best team in the league on the road, and it wasn't because they made amazing plays in the last 2 minutes of games. It was because they had enough of a cushion that it didn't come down to that. So, I mean, that's another thing too that has happened a bunch this year, is that, like I keep saying, the the margin of error is razor thin, and unfortunately, if it comes down to that a lot, you're going to be disappointed a lot because it's, you're not going to be able to consistently win games if it's coming down to that.
So the Pelicans with just 2 games this week. I don't want to say work week, but obviously the Pels play on the weekend here as well through these next 7 days, Jim. Thursday, Sunday, 1 at home, 1 on the road because it's the Emirates Cup that's going on. So they're doing that this week and trying to earn their way to Vegas. Everybody else still plays 2 games to do that. So that's why if you're looking at the schedule, the Pels got a week off. My poor wife. My poor wife was like, you got an entire week off.
He just pulled it out, pulled the rug right out from under her.
Carver was like, we'll have you for dinner. I'm like, 4 of the 5 days, I will take 4 of the 5 days this week. We play Thursday against the Kings at the Smoothie King Center. Sunday, it will be at the Pacers. Get to enjoy the Saints game and then stick around and you'll watch the Pels take on the Pacers. But that's the work week. So we were kind of looking at it, Jim, at this point. The Pelicans' record right now is
5-20.
So it's 25 games. Mm-hmm. Good math, huh? I'm really good. I love numbers like that.
Brother easy. Martin.
It is. We were talking about this yesterday. Where are we? Where are the Pels? And it's not even, as Graf and JD said in the radio roundtable on Friday, don't look at the records. Can you get the players? You just need to get back to playing good basketball, try to win, put some win streaks together. So we thought it would be fun today to kind of look at some things that have gone well and some things that need to be fixed after these 25 games here because most of these games are going to be home in December. You have 2 days of practice. We saw the schedule. They're practicing tomorrow. They're practicing Wednesday to try to get that continuity and all that. So let's start with that, Jim. How do we want to start this?
Let's go. We're going to go back and forth between what's gone right so far this season and what's gone wrong. I know a lot of podcasts recently have done their reviews of the season a quarter of the way through. We're a little bit more than a quarter of the way through, but I think the timing of this is good, based on the fact that they do have a bunch of days before they play another game. So let's start with one of the first things of what's gone right. And to me, I thought we had to begin with Yves Missi, the 21st pick in the draft. I think he's been by far the most positive individual story so far for the Pelicans, and really not just short term, but I think long term, the fact that they found a guy that late in the first round of the draft that appears to be someone that has a promising future and somebody that I think you can count on as a foundational piece for the team going forward. Every team in the league is looking for a guy like this. I mean, we saw this with the Mavericks last year, drafting Derek Lively, who was a big reason why they made the NBA Finals. A guy that can finish around the basket, a guy who's really active. He can move his feet defensively. He can hold up in a lot of areas of the court. And I think, that's the future of the NBA center. It's not the traditional back to the basket guy. It's not, some of the lumbering, slower-footed 7-foot guys that have a hard time on defense against some of the lineups Golden State was the forerunner of this. They put 5 athletic guys on the court, and they say to you, okay, you got a 7'2" guy who can't move his feet. Who's he going to guard? And that's a challenge. And it's not just Golden State that can do that. It's a ton of teams around the league. So, but Yves Missi is averaging the most rebounds per game as a rookie. He's 3rd in block shots from rookies, and he's 8th in points per game at 9.3 per game. He's played 603 minutes so far, which is 5th among all rookies. There's only 3 lottery picks that have been on the floor more than him. So
really,
I mean, he's just been such a huge factor, not just way beyond what you would think when you pick that late in the first round.
We'll get into the awards and all that other stuff and what's merited on that, because I mean, when you're telling me things like that, I mean, can you consider a player like him as Rookie of the Year and things of that nature based on wins and losses? Sometimes
I think so. I think the thing about him is if he keeps on the track he's been on lately, where he's consistently coming up with double-doubles, he's productive every single game, I think he has a chance. And I think, too, that Rookie of the Year isn't the kind of award where they factor in winning and losing that much, because for the most part,
you're probably not going to be on a good team.
Right.
Yeah.
For the most part, the guys that come in are not. I mean, Wemby last year, his team won 21 games, and he was, had a phenomenal rookie year. So, I think he has a chance. I've been started looking at the NBA.com rookie ladder a little bit the last couple weeks, and he's 6th on that now. So he has a little bit of a ways to go if you look at maybe what some of the national conversation is. Mm-hmm. Stephon Castle is a guy that is up there in the rankings as well. So, I mean, there's some players that that maybe have slightly more production than Eve does, but I think some of that he's catching up based on the way he's played lately.
Castle with 22 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists last night for the Spurs. Eve Misi, 18 points, 14 rebounds, 2 blocks, and a steal in 32 minutes. And Jim, I think the thing about it is we about to hear what Willie Green has to say about him, because again, he's standing out. Like you're watching the game, and while the game's going this way or that way, he looks the part. Like he is a bright part of this team. I feel like several times we'll watch the game together. I'm like, I mean, how's this guy? This guy is a bright spot. I think the other thing too is something we mentioned in that radio roundtable, that with these injuries, like just imagine what his numbers may be if Zion's on that court, if Brandon Ingram's on that court, if DeJounte Murray and McCollum and Herb Jones and all those other aspects of where just this athleticism can be used, in that aspect of it, man. It just stinks. But here's Willie Green last night after the game.
It's incredible, his ability to pick things up, pick up concepts, to get on the floor and be able to execute it on the fly. And the biggest thing about Eves is that every single practice, shoot-around game, he competes at the highest level that he can. He gives you everything he has. And I think that just starting with that is allowing him to step on the floor and play against some of the best players and contribute at a high level.
To one of your points, Gus, about how much other guys coming back will affect him, he's shooting 54% from the field, which is really good, but I think you're talking 60% probably plus if you have Zion out there. Just imagine some of the alley-oops that he's going to be able to get from other players drawing attention. I mean, I think he's doing that really well as it is now in terms of knowing what spots to be in, where he can get open, and DeJounte Murray's been finding him a lot. So I think the efficiency for him is really good so far, especially for a rookie. But, yeah, I think at full strength we're talking that's going to go up even more, especially as he continues to just adjust to the NBA and learn the other team's personnel and that kind of thing.
All right, we're doing a little what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, now it's time to go to the negative side of the ledger. I think really from a big picture standpoint, one of the biggest things that's happened so far that's a negative is the team defense has dropped significantly. They were 6th in defense the previous 2 seasons. This season they're 28th, and the only 2 teams that they're ahead of in defensive efficiency are Utah 29th and Washington 30th. Obviously, both of those teams are in a mode of looking so much further down the road. They're playing a bunch of young guys that they drafted this year in both of those cases, especially Washington. They're not worried about, immediate results. So it's disappointing to only be 28th in defense as the Pelicans from where they were the previous 2 years. And, I mean, there's 2 parts of this, too, that if you add these 2 things together, you understand there's a reason why they're in the bottom tier defensively. They're 29th in paint points allowed per game, and they're also 27th in 3-point makes per game allowed. So, I mean, you're not taking away the 3-point shot or the shots in the paint or at the rim. So that's the reason why they're really struggling. I do think that there's hope for that to improve significantly now that Herb Jones is back in the lineup and now that he's getting to play with DeJounte Murray. I'm curious to see how that goes. I mean, I'm going to set an arbitrary goal right now that by Christmas, I'd like to see that maybe they can get at least into maybe closer to the middle of the pack of the NBA. Maybe not over the course of the season.
True.
But, I mean, maybe in December, for example, now that they have Herb back, that they'll be able to be closer to the middle and then eventually get back to where they were last season.
Yeah. All right. What else has gone right in a season where you're 5-20?
Yeah, I mentioned Eve Misi. I think the second best individual story so far has been Brandon Boston. I mean, here's a couple of stats that kind of illustrate the impact that he's made based on what you would expect from a guy on a 2-way contract. He scored 267 total points this season, which is actually second on the Pelicans. So among New Orleans players, the second most points have come from a guy who's on a 2-way deal.
Wow.
The Pelicans as a team have had 369 points scored from 2-way contract guys. So just to put this in context, second across the entire NBA is the Clippers with 156. So not only have the Pelicans gotten twice as many points from their 2-way contract guys than any other team across the league, but Brandon Boston by himself has scored more points on a 2-way deal than every other team in the entire league has done. So
that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And he's also 23rd in the NBA in steals per game at 1.5. His minutes have gone down a little bit lately because of some guys coming back, including Herb Jones. So it's almost unfair comparison to do per game with him based on some of the other leaders in the steals category. But either way, I mean, 23rd in steals. He definitely didn't have a huge defensive reputation, so that's been another area. But overall, I mean, just the way that he's contributed based on, I mean, they signed him right before the season started, and I think there's been a game or two that they wouldn't have won without him, and then there's been several other games that they wouldn't have been competitive in that ended up being losses, but you put forth a lot more reasonable product on the court because of his presence.
17 points, 3 rebounds, an assist, and a steal yesterday in 28 minutes, 7 of 12 from the floor, 3 of 5 from distance, so 3 threes. I mean, any team would take that stat line from a guy off the bench.
Yeah, he played really well
Yeah.
against the Spurs, and I guess it's worth noting too that San Antonio waived him right before the season started, which is the way that the Pelicans were able to sign him. So that was a good break for New Orleans that he wasn't able to make San Antonio's roster.
Yves Messi and Brandon Boston, two nice things that have gone on. You mentioned one that didn't go so well. There's another one.
Yeah, in addition to the team defense, the second thing that's gone wrong so far is the three-point shooting for the team overall. So another comparison. Last season, they were 4th in the NBA at 38.3% from three-point range. This season, they're 27th at 32.7%. So they've dropped off almost 6% from three-point range, which I didn't look across the entire league, but I'm guessing that that's the biggest falter of any team of the 30 this season. And, I mean, it's kind of an unfortunate kind of neat, and I don't mean neat in terms of this is great neat. I mean in terms of kind of a tidy, easy-to-remember stat that they were 4th in percentage last season, and this season they're 4th worst. So it's been just a complete flip of where they're at. And, you know, I don't want to get too crazy and too deep into the numbers, but I do think it's worth kind of going through a few of the guys to show you, you know, the track record that some of these guys have. And then if you look at what they've shot this season, it's really kind of interesting. Starting with the guys that are high-volume three-point shooters, the guys that get up a bunch of them. Trey Murphy, his first 3 seasons in the NBA from three-point range, he shot 38, 41, and 38%. This season he's at 34. So that's a pretty significant drop. CJ McCollum, his previous 3 seasons was 39, 39, 43, which is elite, just very much like Trey Murphy. This season he's down to 31. So he's dropped off more than 10% from just last season. 43 a year ago, 31 this season. DeJounte Murray, you know, he's been an average three-point shooter throughout his career, maybe a little bit below average. His previous 3 seasons, 33, 34, 36. This season he's at 26 so far. He hasn't played that many games, so you would think that number is going to come up. It's definitely a small sample. And then lastly, Herb Jones, first 3 seasons in the NBA, 34, 34, 42 last season, which was a huge improvement. But so far he's at 29 this season. So just like it's incredible that CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, and Herb Jones, all 3 of those guys are shooting 10% worse early in this season compared to what they did last season. So you ask, how does this team go from, you know, top tier to bottom tier? I mean, just look at those 3 or 4 guys in terms of how much of a difference is. And lastly, too, on the three-point shooting, this is another thing that I thought about that once again goes to the theme of this season, of the way things are going. So 2 of the guys that have done really well from three-point range, Jose Alvarado shooting a career-high 40%. Brandon Ingram is tied for a career high with 2.4 makes per game. But, of course, both of those guys are injured.
Yeah.
So
you basically just gave me the ingredients to a disastrous, horribly tasting gumbo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you put all of the ingredients,
Why
the worst
is this
possible
team 5 and 20? Here you go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, defense is down, three-point shooting is down. And again, I think what you're doing, too, as well, is you're giving tangible math and things that you can wrap your head around to fans that maybe are going, why is this team so not good? Or they're tired of hearing about injuries. But this is a byproduct of injuries. I mean, this, when I say that, is I mean that like you haven't played that many games, so it's hard for you to get going as a three-point shooter when you haven't. You haven't played 20, 25 games. You played 10. You've played 6. So you have 2 games where you haven't shot well, the numbers are going to go down. When you don't have your best defensive player, it's going to affect your defense. The one game the guy comes back against the Suns, I mean, he blocks Devin Booker and wins the game. I mean, you don't think he makes a difference. That's what I'm saying. It's like these are all ingredients as to why, and they're byproducts of injuries. They just are.
I also think, too, that to me, the defensive drop-off, like I said, 6th last season, 28th in defensive efficiency this season, a huge chunk of that is injuries.
Yeah.
And I think the three-point shooting, there's a part of that is injuries as well. But I also think if you have your better players on the court, if you have your best players on the court, some of those percentages would be higher because the looks that Trey Murphy, CJ McCollum are getting would be a little bit better. But I also do think that there's a flukiness part of three-point shooting, especially at this stage of the season. I mean, don't hold me to this, Gus, but I do think that I'd be surprised if in all of 4 of the players' cases that I listed, I'd be surprised if not all. I think all of them by, say, the All-Star break will have higher three-point percentages than they do now. It's just one of those things that you just can't predict from season to season, especially in the case of guys that have what's crazy too is all 4 of those guys have returned from injury at some point this season as well. So I think that might be part of it too, that it takes a little while to get into a rhythm. Trey Murphy is a very good example of a guy who has shown a track record of it takes him a little time as the season goes on. His rookie year, he was so much better in the second half of the season. Last season, he had a late start and got hotter as the year went on. So hopefully we'll see that. But, I mean, there's no debating that that's a huge chunk of why the team has the record that they do. Three-point shot is, if you're 20 years ago, if you were shooting threes poorly, it wouldn't be as damaging. But now, because every team takes so many, you can't be near the bottom of the league and expect to be able to overcome that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, you got one more good thing and bad thing here?
Yes, I got one more on both sides of the ledger. Then I got a couple quick kind of rapid fire ones that I'll kind of briefly go through. So what's gone right, a third thing that's gone right is the Pelicans are not a great team overall rebounding-wise, but offensive rebounding, they've really done some good things this year. They're 9th in offensive rebounding percentage, and 2 guys I want to give credit to. We talked a little bit already about Yves Missi, and I'm going to talk even more about him later in the podcast, but he's 5th in the league in offensive rebounding among all players who've played at least 15 games. He's averaging 3.8 boards per game, which is outstanding for any player, but especially a rookie. And then Jeremiah Robinson Earl is 24th in the NBA in rebounds per 36 offensive rebounds per 36 minutes with 3.8. I think he's done a really good job of just sticking his nose in there, going after loose balls, going after ball comes off the rim in the middle of the paint. There's 2 or 3 guys on the other team that have a chance for it, and he's like, I don't care. I'm going to still, throw my body in there and risk whatever to come up with balls. So I think he's done a really good job. So those 2 guys, I think in particular, have contributed to one of the things that's gone right.
What's not going wrong?
Well, this one, people probably might even be wondering, like, why did you wait until the third one for this of what's gone wrong?
Right.
But maybe I waited till last or third because it's so obvious. But the injuries, the injuries has been the number one negative factor of, what's happened so far. It's almost like a lot of times I feel like it's pointless to keep repeating, okay, this has gone wrong because of the injuries and this is happening because of injuries, because it's like people that follow the team know that, so you don't have to keep reiterating it. But I'll just go with one stat because I think people have probably already gotten beaten over the head with some of the data that's related to injuries. But to me, this kind of sums it up. The Pelicans have used 17 different starting lineups, and just looking at the Western Conference, I went through this morning. There's 4 teams in the West that have used, 5 teams in the West that have used 5 starting lineups or less. Pelicans have used 17. So Denver's used 5, Minnesota 3, Clippers 4, Spurs 4. Rockets have only used 2 different starting lineups. Pelicans have used 17. So by the 7th game of New Orleans season, it already used 5 different starting lineups. And there's teams that already this deep, 25-ish games into the season, there's 5 other teams in your conference that have only used 5 or fewer. So that kind of just shows just how much not only guys have been out of the lineup, but just how much they've had to change things from night to night. I mean, they've only played 25 games. There's only been a couple times when from one game to 2 days later, they were able to keep the same starting 5. It's changed so frequently, and that part of it has been really damaging. And I guess lastly, I'll go through these really quick. Just some quick hitters, what's gone right. So what's gone right, Brandon Ingram made a game-winning shot at Portland, second game of the season. Pelicans had a 7-point win over Denver that I think was impressive. And then Herb Jones has a game-winning block against Phoenix, against Devin Booker to win that game. I think those were 3 of the biggest highlights of the season from a team standpoint. What's gone wrong? You're going to laugh at this one. So the Pelicans, according to ESPN, have had the 5th toughest strength of schedule so far. According to NBA.com, it's the 2nd most difficult. And obviously, different sites use different methods. Mm-hmm. But the funny part is there's a website called Tankathon that has the toughest remaining schedule. And according to them, the Pelicans have the 3rd toughest remaining schedule.
Really?
So how is that possible?
That's very interesting,
Gus?
yeah.
How do you have the 2nd toughest schedule through 25 games from NBA.com, but yet over the last 57, you have the 3rd toughest remaining? That boggles my mind. Yeah. I don't even know how the heck that is possible.
Well, as a New Orleanian, I can tell you, Jim, the way we operate around here is we just simply broadly say the NBA hates the Pelicans. Then we'll, go right sub underneath it and go, the commissioner hates the Pelicans and all of that. Look,
I don't think it's a grand conspiracy, but something is crazy. I don't understand. But maybe someone smarter. Maybe someone's. How it works. I mean, there are different methods from different things, and of course, I cherry picked different ones. Maybe NBA.com would say that their schedule remaining isn't as tough as Tankathon says it is, but still, nonetheless, I thought that was a funny way to kind of end this.
But still,
segment.
to your point, though, even if that's the case, right? I mean, 2nd or 5th. Let's just say it's a top 5, top 10 strength of schedule to begin with. And then you have how many out of 25 games starting lineups different? 18?
17.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That makes it really hard to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it just is what it is, right? When you look at it like that.
It would have been nice to have some of the schedules that some of the teams in the East have had so far. And I'm not going to sit here and say under the Pelicans' circumstances that if they had an East schedule that they'd be, 15-10 right now instead of 5-20. But I do think that they probably would have found a way to put together a couple more wins. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and you're playing a group of West teams that pretty much all have their sights on making the postseason, other than probably Utah and Portland. And you lost to Portland, so in one of or twice in the 3 games that you played them. So I mean, it's just been like you can tell in my voice. It's just been everything this year.
You've been frustrated. I get you.
Yeah.
A lot of people are as well. Are ready to go to the 3rd?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Well, it's a Monday. Thankfully, Jim is always our Friday. It's time for Mr. Eichenhofer to give his players of the week and a player to watch for this week. What you got, big guy?
Well, Mallory, let's start with player of the week, and I think I had to go with Yves Missi. We've already talked about him a lot,
good
but
pick.
I mean, I thought once again over the last 4 games, he's been super productive. By the way, too, sometimes we talk about individual games or like this guy had a stretch of 2 or 3 games. Isn't that encouraging? Mm-hmm. But I went back and looked at it. Over his last 10 games now, he's averaging a double-double. So this is not the kind of thing where it's just been like, oh, nice game here, and then he goes away. He's been so consistent over this last stretch since mid-November. Over the last 4 games, which was week 7 of the NBA schedule, he averaged 14.5 points, 11.3 rebounds, and 1.3 blocks. So he was a huge factor. Pelicans went 1-3. They did get a win over Phoenix, lost the other games, but kind of in keeping with the theme of some of what we just talked about, only 6 Pelicans players appeared in all 4 games. He was one of them. So another aspect of what Yves has brought is just his reliability. He's been playing through a couple bumps and bruises lately, but I mean, so valuable to have him on the court. Player to watch over this week, and we mentioned earlier they only have 2 games this week. We knew that this was going to be a light week schedule-wise.
Right.
They play Sacramento on Thursday, and then Indiana on Sunday. And by the way, the Pelicans went 6-0 against Sacramento last season, winning by an average of 17.2 points per game. So hopefully they can take advantage of that and just continue the success that they've had against the Kings. But the player to watch is going to be Herb Jones, and specifically for his defense, I'm so glad that he's back in the lineup and that we have him as an option to pick for the player to watch now after he came back kind of midweek last week. Sacramento, De'Aaron Fox is kind of the head of the snake for them.
Yeah.
Herb often draws that defensive assignment.
He's had some games this year, hasn't he?
Yeah, he really has. He had a 60-point game, I believe, in
Right.
one night.
And then like a 50 right afterwards.
Yeah, and then the Indiana game, Herb had a really in Smoothie King Center last season. Herb did really well against Tyrese Halliburton. He really struggled during what was an all-star year for him. So it's possible that we'll see Herb get that assignment. He missed both of the Indiana games, so it was damaging to not have him on there. And by the way, too, just a quick fact on the Pacers-Pelicans series, the home team has won the last 8 games of that series. So each of the last 4 seasons, no road team has won when the Pelicans and Pacers have played each other. So New Orleans will try to end that streak on Sunday when they play at Gainbridge Fieldhouse.
See what happens. I love the positivity there. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to be positive,
You
Gus.
got to. Look,
You gotta be.
I love that. We went and looked in this podcast at some numbers to tell maybe why things are the way they are and why maybe things can be more hopeful when you get some of these guys back. And I do think it does come down to competing. You heard DeJounte Murray say it here as well. When you compete, you at least give yourself a chance. At some point, maybe Trey Murphy's threes go down. Maybe the putback by Yves Missi before that three goes in as well. Maybe Victor Wembanyama misses that three. You know, I do believe, and you believe this, we've covered sports long enough. Luck is a pendulum. It's going to swing both ways. During a season, things will go your way, and then during a season, things won't go your way. It's somehow, some way to get healthy, just get these guys playing together and move on.
And what I want to see, too, I know I mentioned this briefly earlier, too. What I want to see is the Pelicans do some very tangible things better so that luck is less of a factor, that it doesn't come into play because you have wins secured. You're up by 10 with a minute left. You don't have to have it come down to, a coin flip type of game. And by the way, that was a lot of me talking on this podcast. My voice is starting to go a little bit. I think I'm going to go have a drink right now.
There you go.
Of water.
Of water. Now you know what it's like to have hosted a 3-hour talk show.
Oh, my God. Exactly. I can't even imagine.
You get used to it, even though you get hoarse towards the end. And then that's why my wife would be like, you never talk to me at the end of the day. I'm like, I just want quiet.
What an excuse that you have there, Gus.
I did. Now I got no excuse. As always, we appreciate you tuning us in here in the New Orleans Pelicans podcast. We'll see you again on Wednesday. Until then, have a great week, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans podcast.